All right, welcome into this episode of Farz Cast. Farzin, Vousoughian here with you. Back again, second episode of the week. Generally, we don't do two episodes this week, but when you've got a very special guest like this gentleman coming up right here, I'll introduce in just a moment. We definitely can make some room and do multiple podcasts per week. Facebook.com/Farzin Vousoughian, at Farzin21 on Twitter. That is the social media. You guys know the drill here. If you guys see the video version of the podcast, you can see right beside me the man to my right, but for most of you guys watching to your left. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum right here in Kansas City. Also the host of the Black Diamonds podcast, just named the sports podcast of the year, which is awesome. SiriusXM does a fantastic job with their podcast. So many great podcasts on there. And I know that can be accessed on other outlets as well if you're not subscribed to SiriusXM, but a lot of great content on there. Joining me right now, Bob Kendrick. Bob, I've heard you speak multiple times in public at certain events. It really is an honor to have you. I appreciate you making time for the podcast today.
Oh man, it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I just want to touch on the podcast because I mentioned podcast of the year. I'm about 4 episodes in, and I'll be honest, I've never listened to a podcast like this where it's kind of like a docuseries podcast. And there's some commentary in there, a lot of fantastic interviews. And you know, the first couple of episodes are not about the actual like baseball games with the Negro Leagues, especially the first 2 episodes talking about Jackie Robinson and his backstory. Yeah. I mean, that was really fantastic the way you guys broke that all down. How did this podcast come about? What inspired you to want to do this podcast?
I don't know if it was necessarily me being inspired as it was the insight of my friends over at SiriusXM Radio, who had approached me on a couple of occasions about the notion that, well, we think you're a pretty good storyteller, and we think that these stories that a lot of baseball fans haven't heard before would make great content for a podcast. Would you be interested? And I'm like, guys, I don't have time. You know, things are pretty busy here at the Negro Leagues Museum. So I never saw myself hosting a podcast, and they kept building the case. And last year, I finally said, okay, let's give this a try. I had no idea what the heck I was getting myself into. But I, by the same token, I am extremely excited and proud of the reaction that this podcast has drawn from a new generation of baseball fans who are hearing these stories, many of them hearing about the Negro Leagues in general for the first time, but certainly some of the insight to some of the stories that we've shared, you know, taking a deeper look at Jackie Robinson and why, as we say, he was chosen to be the first man to walk on the moon. Because when Jackie breaks the color barrier in Major League Baseball 75 years ago, this coming April the 15th, for Black folks, that was the kind of euphoria that was generated. It was very much equivalent to the way that this country reacted when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. And so we examined why he was the chosen one, because in all honesty, he wasn't the best player in the Negro Leagues, but he was the right player. And so that is what jump-started our series way back in April of last year. And we ended up doing about 25, 26 different episodes over what we broke down into 2 seasons. So now we'll be entering year 2 coming up this coming April and starting to lay the groundwork for what we hope will be another exciting season of telling these stories. But man, it's been amazing again to see the reaction, and people are falling in love with the Negro Leagues through this podcast. But you know, I find it really interesting because storytelling is such a prevalent part of the African American experience. Really, primarily because our stories had never been properly documented in the pages of American history books. So, more times than not, your grandparents or your grandparents sat you down at their feet and then they told you these things. You know, they would sit you down and say, boy, let me tell you about these ball players you should have seen. You know, and that's kind of how we learn about ourselves. And so I find it so interesting that podcasts have become so increasingly popular but in essence, they're just long form storytelling. And so it's been really interesting to share this insight with our followers and subscribers and to see their reactions to. And, now it's getting a little unnerving because I can be in the museum giving a tour and someone will come over to me say, "Oh, I knew that was you. I heard your voice."
Well, listen, you do a fantastic job with it. You and your team, everyone,
Well,
all the audio clips we hear on there, all the guest interviews. I mean,
yeah,
it really is well done. And I want to go back to what you were saying because you talked about the younger generation. I feel like the Negro Leagues does not get discussed enough when it comes to sports history. And it's not just about, picking up a baseball bat and playing, because there's a lot more beyond that. And like I said, you guys covered that so much in your first couple of episodes on the podcast. This kind of leads me to my next question. And I know this has been talked about a lot about you. I see your passion in wanting to tell this story. Why is it so important for you personally to be able to tell the story to, I mean, not just younger generations, even older generations who may not be
absolutely.
familiar with this?
Absolutely, because there's still a lot of people in this country who not only didn't know that a Negro Leagues existed, but certainly did not know that it existed to the magnitude in which it did. And for me, I found it to be fascinating when I got introduced to this story way back in 1993, 29 years ago, when I stumbled into this as a volunteer for this organization. And now, in my case, I was a baseball fan. And I thought I knew a little bit about this game. And then, man, I quickly learned that I didn't know a doggone thing about this game because here was this entire chapter of baseball and Americana that I knew virtually nothing about. Yes, I knew the names Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, Josh Gibson. These are mainstream names. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Now, you may not know just how great they were, but you likely heard those names. But I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. And I was fascinated by it. And I wanted to learn as much as I could. And I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way I felt about it. And so all of a sudden now I'm just in a position where I just wanted to assist the museum in any way that I could to spread the gospel about this story. And of course, then I started to meet the players. And now I'm falling even deeper in love with this story because the player spirits, man, were just so amazing. And of course, as you know, one particular player, my dear friend, the late great Buck O'Neill, and they wrote a piece on MLB.com that was released yesterday, written by my friend Bill Latson, who I had told him, I said, once you're bitten by the Buck bug, it's a wrap. You just wanted to be on Buck's team. It was infectious, and uh, and so now I'm falling even deeper in love with this and I had no idea that I was walking into what would become my passion. And I think when you understand the scope of this story, you do want people to really embrace what this is all about. And it is more than something that just happened yesteryear. I think the life lessons that stem from this story are just as pertinent and profound today as they were when this history was being made, you know, decades ago. And that's the piece that excites us, particularly as a cultural institution, as a museum, the challenge of making this history relevant. What Sirius XM Radio has done is provide me with a national platform to help continue to establish relevancy as it relates to this story, and people are being drawn to it. But as I remind people all the time, Farzin, what's not to love about this story? This story embodies the American spirit, unlike any story, I believe, in the annals of American history. And so it is essentially everything we pride ourselves about being American because it's about pride and passion, perseverance, determination, courage. Yeah, and it's all wrapped up inside this incredible story of these strong willed individuals who just needed a forum to play ball. That's all they wanted to do. They just wanted to play ball. They didn't know they were making history. They didn't care about making history. They just wanted to play ball. But again, all of those things we just talked about, pride, passion, perseverance, determination, courage, helped them pursue the game that they love to the point that they would not only change the game, but ultimately change our country for the better. And all of that comes to life here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And so for me to be a steward of this story and to do everything in my power to keep the legacy and the great work that Buck O'Neill, the foundation that he had laid to build this museum going, it motivates me every single day. Now I'm self-motivated, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wanted to do this as much for Buck as I did for myself personally, but also as a representative for the 3,000 plus players who called the Negro Leagues home. They should never be forgotten. They really shouldn't. And that's our job, is to make sure that they are not forgotten, but also the fact that what they gave us can be used as a tool of hope and inspiration for future generations.
You mentioned Buck O'Neill a couple of times. I was going to ask this later, but I figured now would be a great time to ask. I mean, what was your reaction when you found out that he's finally going into the Hall of Fame?
Oh man, it was jubilation, elation. There, as you could well imagine, was some extremely nervous moments leading up to the announcement on Sunday, December the 5th.
Yeah.
And we had a watch party here at the museum. And we had, I don't know, close to 300 plus people that had gathered here. And we're all anxiously awaiting the announcement, which, as you know, was being broadcast live on Major League Baseball Network. And so Major League Baseball Network had set me up. So I'm going to go live with them if any Negro Leaguers were to get in. And I'm saying to myself now, I don't know how I'm going to be able to conduct an interview if my guy doesn't get in. I'm going to have to be here and try to be strong enough to talk about the other individuals that may have gotten in when my guy didn't get in. I'm like, can you do this? And so I'm all prepared, and we're all anxious. And the minute that Josh Rawitch over at the National Baseball Hall of Fame started to read the bio, we knew, and the room erupted into a thunderous ovation. And honestly, I felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders, and I could finally exhale. And at that point in time, I became overcome with emotions because now I'm going back 15 years later when the verdict didn't go our way, when I had to walk in the conference room adjacent to my office and tell my friend Buck O'Neill that he didn't get enough votes to get in, when honestly, I think in his heart, he thought he was in. And I had to go break the news. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do in either my personal or professional life, was to deliver that news to Buck. Now, who handled it better than anyone? Buck did. Yeah. And so now I'm remembering and reflecting. And of course, it's bittersweet from the standpoint that we wish he was here to celebrate with us, or so that we could celebrate with him. It doesn't diminish the accomplishment, and it certainly doesn't diminish the potential impact that it will have on his organization. But all of that is cascading back to me, and the tears just started to flow. But unlike in 2006, they were tears of anguish. This time, they were tears of joy. Yeah, and now we finally get to celebrate Buck O'Neill taking his rightful place amongst the immortals of this game at the National Baseball Hall of Fame. I can't wait till Sunday, July 24th, when it becomes official.
Yeah, I'm sure you're counting on the days, and as are a lot of baseball fans here in Kansas City. And as someone from not originally from the United States, my family and I coming from Iran, I wasn't too familiar with this stuff. That's one reason why I appreciate the museum and the podcast and learning the backstory about Buck O'Neill. Everyone in Kansas City is happy about that, so it's always great learning about all of that. I've got to ask, obviously the Kansas City T-Bones. One of the minor league teams here in Kansas City. Well, they're no longer the T-Bones. They changed their name now to the Monarchs. I've got to ask, what do you think of that?
We were super excited. We're super excited, and the initial success that the ball club has had lends for even greater excitement. But when Mark Brandmeyer, who honestly I didn't even know had bought the former Kansas City T-Bones. So when he approached me about the notion of naming the T-Bones the Monarchs, initially I wasn't enthralled with the idea. Because the Monarchs is our flagship brand. That's our baby. It is a symbol of greatness and winning spirit. And so I wasn't exactly enamored with the idea. But then the more that I had a chance to talk to Mark and then eventually our board, who were going to be involved in ultimately working out the details of a potential partnership, got to spend time with Mark and his team, privy to their business plan. But the key thing for me, and I think this is when the light bulb came on, I talked about this earlier, as a museum, a history museum in particular, and a cultural institution, it is so vitally important that you find ways to keep this history relevant. And it dawned on me that every time these young kids, and these are kids in independent baseball now, many of them are coming because the minor leagues have been kind of cut down considerably. So these are a lot of kids who are coming from those affiliate minor league teams to play independent baseball. So they still have hopes of getting to the show. And every time Farzin, one of these kids puts on those Monarch pinstripes, they're channeling the spirit of Buck O'Neill and Satchel Paige and Willard Brown and Hilton Smith. Yeah. And all of a sudden, those players come to life again. And now there's even more interest in maybe wanting to learn about the history of the Kansas City Monarchs and then wanting to learn about the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And so all of this alongside the partnership opportunity, and that's what I remind people, this is not a charitable kind of connection. This is a business partnership that is orchestrated between the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and now the Kansas City Monarchs. And so there are some business aspects to this that will create perpetual revenue for this museum for years to come. And I think any museum would look at those opportunities as very much wanted opportunities. And so that alongside the opportunity to create relevancy, to extend this museum to Western Wyandotte County as a possibility of drawing more fans to come in from that part of our city into the museum. They're going to be a moving billboard for us as they're going into other cities and building that brand recognition, not only for the ball club, but for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as well. And so there were so many winning propositions associated with this that it only made sense. And I am thrilled with the direction that the partnership has already gone. For them to win the American Association Championship in their flagship season. Because the one thing that I told them was that, look, if you're going to be called the Kansas City Monarchs, you've got to win. Yeah, no, you can't be losing wearing the Monarch uniform. Oh, I'm going to take my uniform back, take my name back. And they did just that. And the winning spirit of the Monarchs is still very much alive. And so, but it opens the door for even heightened possibilities as we now get ready for season 2 of Monarchs baseball. But you know how cool it is every night when folks are going to the ballpark and the PA announcer says, now here's your Kansas City Monarchs.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's a reign reborn, literally. And we don't want people to forget what the Monarchs meant to this community. Or as they would say, the greatness of the Monarchs lies in the fact that they were the talk of the town all over the world.
One of my favorite traditions that the Royals do once a year is they dress up as the Monarchs. In fact, even on the scoreboard, they actually change it from Royals to Monarchs. In fact, I remember there was a game after they did that, doing it once a year. The day after, they forgot to change it back. So for one inning, it was still left on Monarch. So they forgot to change it in the system. So I do remember that was pretty cool to see. Speaking of the Royals, through the generosity of Royals charities, throughout the month of February, because of Black History Month, admission has been free for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, which is going to be ending pretty soon. But even then, the price of admission is still worth it just to go there. Can you just talk
really
about?
is.
Can you just talk about that opportunity through Royals Charities and what's that meant for the community and the reactions and the amount of people that have come in this month?
Well, it's meant a great deal to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum that our partner, the Kansas City Royals and Royals Charities, essentially bought the museum for the entire month of February, making it free of charge to any and everyone who wanted to come and experience the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We've had people coming in from St. Louis and other places around the region to take advantage specifically of this offer. Others have stumbled into the offer, and what a generous gesture it has been. But I think it speaks to the fact that number one, we have a tremendous partnership with the Royals. Number two, they embrace what this museum represents and how important this museum really is, not from just the standpoint of it being this great baseball museum, but it being a civil rights museum, a social justice museum. And I'm even more excited that scores of people have been taking advantage of this unprecedented opportunity. This is the first time ever a partner has essentially bought the museum out and just said, come one, come all to experience this museum. And it's been amazing, man. And I can't thank my friends over at the Kansas City Royals and Royals Charities enough, again, for this very generous gesture that they made. And like I said, I am just over the moon happy that so many people have taken advantage of this offer. We got a few more days left in it. My dear friend, Big John Mayberry, will be here on Saturday signing autographs.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, signing autographs here for those in attendance from 1 to 2. So if you're going to be in the neighborhood, stop by and see Big John. He's one of my favorite Kansas City Royals, one of the funniest guys in baseball. And so we're excited about that. But again, it just speaks volume to the Royals embracing of this institution.
I know you mentioned on your podcast the museum was shut down a couple of months, as were a lot of businesses because of the pandemic. I got to imagine, as soon as you guys opened back up, that was one of the most exciting days for you, because I know how important that museum is to you and how passionate you are. So that must have been one of the better days for you in 2020 to open those doors back up.
Because 2020 was supposed to be a mega year for the museum, 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues. And so we had all these grandiose plans, year-long celebration to help raise the profile and raise awareness and money for the museum, to commemorate what we thought was one of the most meaningful milestone anniversaries. We thought the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues is one of the most significant things, not just baseball history, but in American history. And we were prepared for this year-long celebration, which we started off in February, on a high note. Major League Baseball and the Players Association, they announced a joint $1 million contribution to the museum, and we rolled out our plans for a year-long celebration, including what was going to be the first ever National Day of Recognition for the Negro Leagues. First time all 30 Major League teams on one given day were all going to celebrate the Negro Leagues. Now, as you mentioned, the Royals have done a Negro League salute. Our friends in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and other places have always done their own salute. This wasn't going to usurp that, but it was going to be first time of complete solidarity that all the clubs were going to honor the Negro Leagues. And then we were going to schedule and plan a tip your cap kind of celebration and ceremony in stadium with fans and players. Well, as you know, in our sport, there's nothing more honorable that a ball player can do than just a simple tip of the cap. It is the ultimate show of respect and acknowledgement. And they were all going to pay honor to the Negro Leagues just by tipping their cap. Well, that was going to happen on June 26th of 2020. Well, as you mentioned, March 14th of 2020, we had to shut the museum down. And we had to shut it down for 3 months because of a coronavirus. I still don't know what a coronavirus is. All I know is that it wreaked havoc and all of our plans were falling by the wayside. And we reopened the museum on June 16th. Again, this event was supposed to take place June 26th. If you recall, back in June of 2020, Major League Baseball and the Players Association were in intense negotiations on if they were going to bring our game back, no less when. And so it was very clear that it wasn't going to happen in June of 2020. And that's when we went to work and came up with the idea of doing a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. And this was just one of the ways in which we were hoping that we may be able to salvage some of this anniversary. You had no idea if this was going to work or not. And when we rolled the campaign out on July 27th, with the help of my good friend, my brother, Joe Posnanski, the great writer,
Yeah.
and his business partner, Dan McGinn, we rolled it out, Farzin, with 4 U.S. presidents tipping their cap. President Obama, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Jimmy Carter, the late great General Colin Powell, transcending athletes like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, my friend Bob Costas, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. The list just went on and on of celebrities and other notables who bought into this idea of either taking a video or a photograph of themselves, tipping their cap, and posting it at a landing page that we created called tippingyourcap.com. And this thing went viral. And when we literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who was aboard the International Space Station, we knew then that we had done something special. And all of a sudden, this feeling of doom and gloom that had kind of swirled over us when this virus first hit turned into renewed hope and optimism. And we were able to kind of turn the tables on what we thought was going to just destroy this big year. And we ended up having a great year. We've been riding that momentum ever since.
That's awesome. That is really great to hear you guys finding ways to take advantage of it. Some people have, and it's been a struggle, but it's great to hear stories like that. You guys have found a way around that kind of situation.
It's about resiliency.
Yes.
And I knew that somehow, some way, we needed to embody the resilient spirit that governed the Negro Leagues. Now, I can tell you, when all of this went down, I wasn't feeling too doggone resilient. I was not, we were all kind of woe is mine when you're not allowed to be woe is mine because the Negro Leagues never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you, I create my own. And so you can't wallow in self-pity, but I'd be lying to you if I told you I wasn't doing a little bit of wallowing. And then at some point you summon up that resilient spirit and you just try to figure out a way to make a way when there seemingly is no way. And we were able to do that. We saw our fortunes reverse and we've been riding this wave ever since. We know we're not out of the woods yet. This old virus is still lingering, but people are starting to come back to the museum in groves again. And we're optimistic about some of the plans for events again this year. And of course, 2 Buck O'Neil Hall of Fame celebrations, one in Cooperstown in July and one back here in Kansas City in November. And so, hopefully we can just continue to build on some of the great work that we've been doing now over the last 2 years, overcoming and dealing with these issues, health scare, the nature of this pandemic.
Bob, before you go, I wanted to go back to Black Diamonds. You mentioned season 2 is going to be starting back up in April. Can you give us a little preview of what people can expect from the podcast?
Well, a lot of it will look at this year's 75th anniversary of the breaking of the color barrier. And we are already in the midst of preparing a brand new traveling exhibition called Barrier Breakers. And the Barrier Breaker exhibit will chronicle all of the players who broke their respective Major League team color barriers. Most of them were former Negro League stars. So we know the story of Jackie relatively intimately. And if you don't know the story of Jackie Robinson, you've got a place that you can turn and get that story. But just as Jackie Robinson was our Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, Larry Doby was our Buzz Aldrin. Yeah, Larry Doby would integrate the American League just weeks after Jackie, and he was almost a forgotten man, just as Buzz Aldrin was the second man to walk on the moon, and nobody seems to remember poor Buzz. And so it took 12 years before every major league team had at least one black player, with the Boston Red Sox being the last to integrate in 1959 when they signed a guy by the name of Pumpsie Green. And so we'll start to examine some of those other integration pioneers, like I said, many of them from the Negro Leagues, and tell those stories. But we've got stories that we're going to talk about, the great two-way athletes of the Negro Leagues, in particular, one guy named Leon Day. Leon Day was the last Negro Leaguer who was alive when he was voted into the Hall of Fame. Now, he died 6 days later in a Baltimore hospital, but at least he knew he was going in. Leon Day is one of the most extraordinary two-way players this game has ever seen. Yeah, last year we talked about the two-way antics of the great Bullet Joe Rogan. We'll talk to Geraldine Day, his widow, about what she recalls him remembering the day he got the word that he was going into the Hall of Fame. And unfortunately, he died 6 days later, and he didn't get to the induction ceremony, but at least he knew he was going in. Leon Day was part of the invasion of Normandy. Yeah, Leon Day and Willard Brown, two Negro Leaguers who were part of the invasion of Normandy during World War II. They helped the Armed Forces baseball team win the championship during World War II. Leon Day was an extraordinary baseball player who, when he wasn't pitching, played every position except really for catcher. And Buck O'Neill said to the day he died that Leon Day was a better center fielder than he was pitcher, and he's in the Hall of Fame as a pitcher. Or as Monty Irvin said, if you saw Bob Gibson pitch, you saw Leon Day. Said Gibby didn't have nothing on Leon Day. And so we'll introduce Leon Day, and we'll talk about the connection between the Negro Leagues and basketball. There's some great stories there of guys who were just extraordinary athletes who, had they not been playing in the Negro Leagues, they would have made their living playing professional basketball. Many of them did by way of playing for the Harlem Globetrotters. And so we'll talk about that. So we've got some fun things teed up this year. We'll talk about J.O. Wilkinson, the only white owner of the original 8 Negro League franchises. He owned the Kansas City Monarchs, and how this diminutive white man from Algona, Iowa, became one of the biggest figures in Black baseball history. So we got some stuff on tap for year 2. So I hope everybody will subscribe to Black Diamonds. Man, it's been amazing, like I said, to see the interest in the podcast. Like I said, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. It was a lot of work, but we're finding time to do it in between meetings and this kind of thing. On the road when I'm trying to hit the golf ball, I got my microphone and my computer with me. And so we'll find time in between bad swings or whatever we need to do to record these episodes, as long as people seem to have an interest in them.
That is awesome. Certainly looking forward to that this upcoming season. I still got to finish the first season, so I got to get through all of that before I can listen to the season 2 episodes. If you want to listen to the Black Diamonds podcast, it is available on SiriusXM as well as other podcasting platforms. Like I said, SiriusXM does a fantastic job with their podcast, not just sports, but in general.
And my team, they are just amazing. From Donnie Samuels, who adds in some voiceover material in there, to the production work, the production value that goes into this. It far exceeded anything that I could have even imagined, but like I said, I had no idea anyway. So whatever we got would have far exceeded anything that I would have imagined, but it's been amazing.
If you guys also want to check out the museum, it is at 18th and Vine in Kansas City. Bob, again, thank you so much for everything you do in your storytelling, telling all these stories about the Negro Leagues. I think it's very important to know, obviously being in Kansas City, very lucky to be in the same city where the Hall of Fame is. So I hope people in Kansas City or those nearby or anyone who visits takes advantage of that, as well as the podcast. Bob, thank you so much again. If you got anything going on, I'd love to reconnect and talk about that here on the podcast in the future.
Yeah, well, we'll have a whole lot of things going on this year, so I'm definitely looking forward to reconnecting and getting back on with you. Again, thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Take care, Bob. Thank you so much.
All right. All right. See ya.
All right. Bye. All right. That is Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, also the host of the Black Diamonds podcast. Check it out. It's awesome. Really great storytelling for our history. So definitely something everyone should check out. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Farz Cast. I am Farzin Vousoughian. 2 episodes of Farz Cast this week. So hope you guys enjoyed both of those. Other than that, I will talk to you guys next week. Take care.